In that white silence, a sound slips between the pines, a baby crying where no child could live. The patrol halts, frost on lashes, breath like ghosts. One of the men stiffens. He swears the voice is his son's, a continent away and safe in a warm house. Before anyone speaks, a whistle cuts the gale. 3 notes, carved into the cold. Low, high, low. No bird answers, no wolf claims it. Just the wind holding its breath, and the men realizing the forest has learned their names. December 1881, southeast Alaska, near the inlets that open toward Thomas Bay. A small detachment from Company A, 2nd U.S. Infantry Regiment, moves inland under Captain Nathaniel Harrow, a quiet officer who writes more than he speaks. His executive officer, First Lieutenant Elias Porter, minds the compass and the angles. First Sergeant Thomas Crow watches the men, their feet, their silences. Sergeant William Tate minds the rations and the damp cartridges. Corporal Amos Redfield, the best at reading terrain, leads the file when the timber knots into confusion. With them march Privates Jonah Pike, Rafael Ortega, Seamus O'Dwyer, and August Sutter, a handful of names the storm will test until they sound like one. The mission is simple on paper. Locate a winter pass that threads the coast to the interior. Reality is a storm that erases edges and chews at bone. Snow sits to the knees and hardens like poured stone. The Springfield rifles grow sullen with moisture, powder clumps and hope misfires. Oil freezes, leather stiffens, breath turns to glass and falls away. The map offers white space where judgment must fill the lines. And the guides they asked for, the natives called the Tlingit, refused to cross into that bay for any price. Captain Harrow wrote the refusal in his book without comment and closed it as if not to let the cold read over his shoulder. Chain of command tightens when sound disappears. Porter keeps bearings by feel when the needle shivers. Crow checks toes and tempers at dusk. Tate breaks hardtack with a hammer and counts the last of the lamp oil. Redfield marks trees with a knife that sticks to his glove. The men speak in brief, practical syllables, as if longer words might spend the day's heat. No birds lift, no hair traces a line across the white. The river under ice knocks like a distant door. Distance flattens. A ridge 30 yards away looks a mile, and a mile looks like a fogged pane. They advance by the measure of boot failure and the sting returning to fingers. They raise a narrow camp in a notch above a frozen creek, tents crusted, ropes humming in the wind. Fires climb only halfway before thinking better of it. Harrow inspects rifles and faces. Porter logs latitudes that bend under auroral haze. Crow walks the ring, counting under his breath. Tate rations by quarter ounces. Redfield listens to the timber shift as if the trees were turning in their sleep. In the captain's journal, we advance alone, uncharted. Inland, even the natives avoid. He stops, adds one more line, strikes it out, and leaves the page pale as snow. After that, the forest seems to lean closer, as if to read them back. At the timber's edge, Corporal Redfield drops to a knee, gloved hand to snow. He studies impressions angled across the drift like a sentence half-written. Heel, ball, 5 blunt toes, human at first glance, ordinary as camp footprints. No claw marks, no drag, clean edges that hold in the bitter air. He measures with his palm, nods once, and looks down range without speaking. Captain Harrow steps beside him, breath feathering the page of his journal. Snow hushes around them, accepting the weight like a keeper of oaths. They follow the line of steps into trees that seem to lean inward. The spacing is wrong for a man breaking trail against knee-deep powder. Each stride is too easy, as if the snow offered a private road. Redfield notes a faint melt rim, heat lingering where no heat should linger. Porter sketches the pattern, pencil jerking when wind fists the paper. Somewhere below the ice, the creek knocks once, like a cautious guest. They go on, mouths shut, eyes fixed on a path that writes itself. They step into the ledger of tracks, leaving their own clumsy signature. The storm softens for a moment, as if listening to their decision. A mile on, the prints begin to stretch, the toes blurring into ovals. The arch slackens into a single curve, as if the foot were poured. Stride length grows, light above deep, like a runner on hardpan. Tate lifts his rifle, then lowers it, ashamed of aiming at snow. A mist of breath wanders across the drift and does not disperse. The wind takes a new set, blowing from behind when it should not. In the next hollow, the toes fan wider, laced by something like skin. Thin webs stitch space between each digit, delicate as frost filigree. No claws pierce. The impressions are smooth, deliberate, almost careful. The men adjust their slings, suddenly polite with the landscape. Somewhere distant, timber creaks like a ship turning in harbor. The trail forks without argument, two lines moving with identical ease. Then three, then one again. The outer sets rejoining like braided rope. Redfield circles, trying to trap a logic that will not be cornered. Porter checks bearings. The compass answers in a small, offended shiver. Tate marks each fork with a rag on a limb, talismans of cloth. The forks repeat, increasingly playful, as if a maker rehearsed us. Ortega breathes faster and counts in Spanish to keep the rhythm steady. O'Dwyer mutters that coyotes play tricks, then hears himself and stops. Harrow points forward. Command is sometimes only the refusal to stop. From the east comes a thin, feathered cry, impossible in this latitude. It rides the wind, breaks and reforms, the exact size of a human need. Pike flinches, head cocked, the father in him stepping forward. The cry returns, closer, then far, then exactly where they stand. Snowflakes hang motionless for a heartbeat, reconsidering their descent. No animal claims the sound, and no echo behaves like it should. A chuckle follows, throat closed and private, as if stifled in a sleeve. It wanders along the spruce line, smiling without a face to wear it. O'Dwyer swears someone is behind him, though his shadow points forward. Sutter whispers that the trees are trading jokes in a language of resin. Tate's finger finds the trigger guard, then leaves it, ashamed of fear. The laughter repeats a phrase, then repeats the repeat, thinning to breath. Porter notes the cadence. It is near human, but the pauses are wrong. Redfield hears a word shaped like his name and refuses to own it. Harrow lifts a hand. Even silence obeys him for a moment. The river under ice knocks twice, as if to suggest a punchline. Then the whistle arrives. 3 notes, low, high, low, clean as cut glass. It comes from ahead, then behind, then both, stitched into the gale. The sound holds edges that travel farther than any human breath. Ortega marks the whistle's intervals, finding a pattern that unknots. It unknots into nothing, and the pattern becomes only their listening. Harrow lowers his hand. He has heard orders given to fewer gods. Private Jonah Pike stiffens, as if a wire tightens across his chest. A small voice says his name, the way it sounds in his own kitchen. He answers with a breath he does not mean to spend into the cold. The voice continues, threading through branches like a toy on a string. It asks for water, then tells a simple joke his boy once mangled. Pike's eyes shine, then water freezes into a rim beneath his lashes. Redfield steps to block him without touching. Contact feels dangerous. Harrow watches the ground. Command sometimes means not meeting eyes. Crow says Pike's name, soft, the way a door is closed at night. A woman's voice follows, calling Pike by a childhood name none here know. The pitch is exact, the timbre right, but the pauses fall out of place. It is speech with the rhythm of breathing learned from the wrong lungs. Pike leans a fraction toward it, as if tide had found him inland. Tate's palm settles on his sleeve, a weight that argues for staying. O'Dwyer mouths a prayer, careful not to make the prayer a signal. The voice repeats the nickname, trying it like a boot it has borrowed. The spruce shake off a lace of snow that lands without a sound. The river knocks once, then goes shy, as if aware of being heard. Harrow gives the rule in a voice quieter than the wind. No replies. Do not answer, do not echo, do not let your mouth teach it your shape. Hold formation, eyes front, rifles low, and keep your breath your own. Crow repeats, making obedience feel like a warm coat passed along. Porter marks the place on paper, a dot that seems to bruise the map. Redfield shifts the column, placing Pike between steadier footsteps. The voices fade, not retreating, but choosing patience over pursuit. What remains is doubt, small and bright, like ice in a cup of fire. The first crack in the wall is not loud, it is simply permanent. They move again, and the forest moves with them, pleased to be invited. They moved on from the prince, and the forest moved with them. Light thinned, wind pushed them into a notch above a frozen creek. Captain Harrow called the halt, and kept his voice even. Tents went low. Canvas pulled tight to keep the gusts off. A perimeter line was set with quiet hands and simple knots. Fire took effort, then held, small and close to the ground. No one talked more than needed. Energy belonged to heat. A quick inventory showed rations and dry socks were short. Rifles were wiped, chambers checked, and muzzles kept down. The camp settled into a routine that felt like relief. Crow assigned watches and sectors with a short list of names. The rule stood, do not answer voices outside the line. Porter logged bearings, though the needle drifted with the storm. A basic map was scratched on a mess lid for reference. Bread was thawed, tea boiled thin, and cups passed along. The creek under ice knocked at intervals none could predict. Snow pressed into seams and silenced small sounds. The captain wrote one line and closed his book. Men lay down with boots near and straps within reach. Night gathered without ceremony and stayed. The storm fenced them in. Visibility fell to a few yards. Cold made tools stubborn and fingers slow but steady. A strap was mended, a stovepipe cleared of packed frost. The perimeter tins did not ring, the line held. Someone hummed once and let the tune die early. Confidence shifted from hope to procedure and stayed there. Redfield checked the nearest drift and reported nothing moving. Pike stared at the dark and counted without numbers. The camp waited, and the forest seemed to be waiting too. Sleep came in short pieces that did not fit together. Near midnight, a whistle cut through, 3 notes. It sounded close, then far, then evenly across the camp. The tins on the line stayed still, metal giving no alarm. Breath paused, even the fire made a smaller sound. Harrow held the men with a hand signal. Hold position. Porter checked the compass. North wandered a finger's width. No one replied. The rule was clear and repeated. The whistle came again, unchanged, as if rehearsed. Snowdrift quieted further, absorbing small noises. They waited for it to stop, and it did not. A second source joined from the ridge above the creek. Another answered from low ground, where ice knocked once. Direction lost clarity. Echoes refused to behave like echoes. Counting intervals produced no pattern worth trusting. The notes were clean, not like animal or wind. A tent rope hummed and then went slack again. Someone whispered a countersign and then regretted it. Harrow said nothing. The order was still the same. The whistle threaded the canvas and seemed to learn them. It kept returning to the exact same 3 notes. A child's cough traveled along the tents, precise and wrong. Laughter followed, close-throated, as if held behind a hand. Pike turned his head and then faced forward again. Crow's step around the ring left almost no mark. Porter closed the notebook to keep it from collecting voices. The stove burned down to a disciplined glow. Snow pressed the guy ropes and held steady pressure. At last, the calls faded to a low hum and waited. Men slept in shifts, ears awake despite their eyes. Dawn felt delayed, as if listening to the same sound. Before first light, Crow's count came up 1 short. Sutter's bedroll held a warm shape and no body. Frost inside the tent lay smooth and undisturbed. The flap lifted, air slipped out, and nothing else moved. A single name was spoken, and the wind kept it. The alarm line was intact. The tins hung quiet and dull. At the edge of camp, the snow smelled faintly of brine. A glove pressed to canvas heard no steps beneath. The creak under ice knocked twice and stopped. The rest of the camp stood and waited for orders. Beyond the line, prints led away, long, light, then longer. Webbing marked the spaces between each toe, thin and clean. The trail began in untouched snow and ended on smooth crust. Redfield followed 6 steps. A 7th would not appear. A rag went on a branch to mark the last sure point. Voices stayed low. Questions were saved for later. Procedure set a search wedge that went nowhere fast. The map got a dot that meant nothing certain. Cold tightened its grip and made decisions for them. Harrow called them in before distance made things worse. Back inside the line, routine replaced speculation. The watch bill changed. Sutter's name was not spoken. Sectors were redrawn. The missing man's lane went blank. A blanket was rolled and tied as if for transport. 10 cups were set out, one cooled untouched. A knife was sharpened for no urgent reason. Pike sat on his hands until they felt like his again. A brief prayer was said without looking up. Morning tested the treetops and eased into the notch. The whistle did not return, which felt like a different threat. Full daylight finally arrived, and Sutter stood at the trees. Coat dry, boots clean, breath normal and unhurried. Frost avoided his lashes the way it avoided metal. His name was spoken. His answer landed a beat late. Sector and countersign came back perfectly, but flat. Leather at his ankles felt warm to the touch. The air around him carried salt and a faint sweetness. He smiled too wide and stopped when told to stop. Behind him, fresh prints stood webbed and exact. The creak knocked once, as if to mark attendance. He thanked someone for tea that had not been poured. He adjusted a strap that had not been loose. The compass lay level on his palm and did not point. His shoulders carried no weight, though the straps showed wear. Pike flinched when his child's name slid into the air. The sound seemed to pass through Sutter rather than from him. The smell of tide water did not fade with the wind. Men moved a little, closing the formation by habit. Harrow made a note and then crossed it out. The stove was packed, as if a march might begin. The 3-note whistle came from Sutter without moving lips. Low, high, low, exactly as in the night. His eyes held a shallow shine like thin water under ice. Harrow stepped closer and saw his reflection lag a fraction. Crow took 1 pace in, unasked, and stayed there. Pike was placed between steadier boots without comment. No one asked where Sutter had gone or how. Everyone behaved as if the answer were outside the rules. The trees seemed to lean back, satisfied with their work. The camp closed around its number, and trust did not. They broke camp at gray light, the stove packed, the page left blank. Harrow chose the safer bearing, back toward timber, away from the bay. Sutter walked inside the file, answering to his name half a beat late. No one spoke of the night. The rule was to give silence a task. Snow fell straight now, a curtain rather than a weapon. The 3-note whistle drifted far off, like a memory rehearsing. Boots found an old game trail that tilted into a narrow cut. The walls rose, snow-lipped, hauling the sky down by degrees. Wind died in there. Breath and boots became the only weather. They entered the ravine as if stepping into a throat. Sound changed shape. Closer, rounder, unwilling to escape. Porter checked the compass and watched north turn to suggestion. Ice glazed the creek, black beneath, faint current dreaming under. The passage kinked left, then right, a river of stone without water. Drifts lay smooth as pages no hand had yet marked. Old slides showed scars, blue ice polished like bone. Webbed prints appeared, then vanished, then walked beside their own. A faint smell of brine gathered and would not thin. Harrow lifted a hand. Keep tight, keep quiet, keep count. The Ravine accepted the order and kept it. At the next bend, forms stood where no forms had stood before. They were shoulder-high and wrong by increments, like bad memory. Water clung to their fur or skin, or something between the two. Arms hung too long, then shortened, then forgot what arms were. Heads turned with a seal's grace and a man's attention. Breath steamed from them in plumes that bent against the windless air. Their feet pressed neat ovals that remembered webbing. One leaned, curious, and its outline ran like thawed wax. Another steadied itself with a hand that learned fingers late. None blinked the way blinking should look. They slid a step, upright, then dropped to fours and thought again. From certain angles they were men in slick coats, soaked but calm. From others, river things risen too far from their home. Light off the ice placed them nearer, then farther, then nearer again. Mouths opened without teeth, then with too many, then with none. The smell of tide strengthened, and a sweetness rode on it. Harrow counted quietly and reached the end too soon. Sutter tilted his head, as if hearing instructions no one else could. The ravine narrowed until even fear had to walk single file. A small shape peeled from the group and crossed the ice. It resolved into a boy in a wool cap, cheeks pinked by cold. His boot prints were tidy, weight-light, hands tucked in sleeves. "Dad," he said, using Pike's kitchen voice exactly once. The patrol held, because rules, because breath, because hope hurts. The boy named the dog they had never owned, then laughed wrong. He knew a joke the real child had mangled, but told it clean. Pike's mouth opened a fraction and closed like frost on glass. The cap sat too straight, as if placed by a careful stranger. Snow hushed, happy to hear a human mistake. The child stepped close enough to salt their coats with sweetness. His pupils were human, then slicked wider, then took on gray. Iris flowed to the color of tide ice under cloud. When it smiled again, the corners bent like a fishline's pull. Pike swayed, caught himself, and did not say the name he owned. The boy tilted his head and waited for the lesson to work. A line of wet gathered at its lip and refused to fall. Another figure behind it lengthened, matching the captain's height. Two more tried on shoulders from men they had just met. Every mirror in the ravine failed to be faithful. Harrow's hand rose, flattened, and cut the air forward. Fire. Bolts worked, breath steadied, sights found chest and shoulder. The first volley slapped the ravine and died without echo. Impacts made snow jump and ice ring like thin bells. A figure staggered, as if remembering how to stagger. A second parted at the ribs and flowed back together. One went from upright to water, and then forgot both. Smoke hung low, refusing to be carried away. Ejected brass chimed and cooled like small decisions. The smell of powder broke against the tide and lost. Volley 2 came shorter, angrier, closer to prayer. A round hit where an ear should be, and learned nothing. Another tunneled the drift behind and killed only distance. Forms rippled, in and out of themselves, like wind in fur. A pair met, overlaid, and swapped shoulders without pause. No blood recorded anything. The ice refused testimony. Sutter did not fire. His mouth shaped 3 soft notes. Pike's hands shook, then stilled, then gripped wood harder. Porter lowered his rifle and watched the compass lie. Harrow stopped the fire with a gesture that saved little. The 3-note call returned, multiplied, layered, relentless. Low, high, low came from throat, from ice, from rock. The ravine became an instrument the storm had tuned. Canvas memories sang in their ears where no tent stood. Helmets rang faintly, though nothing touched metal. Voices came back wearing their own cadence, almost kind. "Hold the line," returned as laughter. Then, as a mother's sigh. The compass needle spun, resting finally on indecision. Boots edged left to safety and found only mirror. Orders dissolved into the sound that knew their names. Figures moved among them with borrowed heights and habits. One wore Crow's posture and smiled with Sutter's mouth. Another took Harrow's stride and drifted through a stone. Pike's boy ran between legs, leaving no mark in crust. Webbed prints bloomed, where no foot fell and closed again. Men fired at shadows that returned as comrades. Countersigns arrived from the wrong lips at the right time. The line collapsed into a circle that did not hold. Retreat had no direction. Advance had too many. The ravine kept them, and the whistles did the counting. They broke when the ravine's chorus swallowed orders into noise. Sutter stood too still and gave the countersign in Crow's cadence. Harrow answered by reflex and stepped toward the voice that matched. Two figures took on familiar heights and guided half the line left. Pike heard Eli behind him and drifted that way, rifle low. Tate and O'Dwyer followed the posture they trusted, not the map. Webbed prints bloomed ahead and closed, inviting and neat. Ice underfoot rang thin. The walls leaned as if to listen. On the right, a slab slumped, opening a raw seam to timber. Redfield saw it, seized Ortega's sleeve, and chose the seam. They moved sideways, not back, keeping boots on crust that held. The whistles chased, then flattened, then sounded from inside breath. A shape wearing Harrow's stride paused, smiling with Sutter's teeth. Redfield kept eyes low, counting steps, refusing any known voice. The seam widened into scattered stone and scrub that cut wind. Behind, fire spoke once more, short and prayerful, then failed. They climbed until the ravine was a rumor under snow. Days unstitched, water burned cold, bread counted itself to 0. Gulls finally found them, and smoke wrote a word on the bay. Fishermen pulled them aboard and they laughed like borrowed men. In the net shed, Ortega shrank into careful silence. He ate, slept, and watched the tide adjust its breathing. Words arrived and died on his tongue without becoming sound. A doctor tapped reflexes. The body answered, the man did not. Asked for his name, he lifted 2 fingers, then none. At night, 3 notes escaped his teeth, soft and exact. He woke with dry lashes and a damp collar of brine. Priests tried patience, fishermen tried stories, both learned restraint. He traced ovals on wood with a wet thumb, then stopped. The army clerk wrote, "No statement," and folded the page. Redfield spoke in a ledger's tone, steady until memory slipped. He drew the webbing between toes and the prints that rejoined. He detailed the boy's cap set too carefully on hair. He said rounds rang bells and learned nothing from their targets. He described faces borrowed, exchanged, and worn until they cracked. He said the ravine tuned their names and played them back. He marked where the seam slumped and why he chose it. He ended with a line the pen did not want to keep. "If I returned," he said, "I am not the one you remember." The page dried slow, as if the ink feared being seen. The order went out quiet. Avoid Thomas Bay in winter operations. Not printed ban, but guidance traveling faster than official paper. Maps received a penciled crosshatch and no legend to explain it. Circulars cited avalanches, hollow ice, and unreliable snow bridges. Another memo added cultural considerations and left it there. Patrols shifted inland, choosing known hardship over unknown rules. Requests for Tlingit guides ended with a brief, firm refusal. The journals from that season were filed in a deeper drawer. A quartermaster stamped impracticable where routes once promised ease. The stamp outlived the men whose boots proved it true. Years layered, and the crosshatch kept its color through revisions. New officers asked why. Answers arrived shaped like weather. Fishermen swore storms there carried 3 precise notes. A missionary called it superstition and slept with lamps lit. Once a hunter vanished, the report reused older language. The army accepted the map's warning the way it accepts winter. The Tlingit said little and looked at the tree line once. In a later ledger, a captain copied the caution by habit. He did not believe, but he obeyed as if belief were required. The land kept its lesson, and kept the names it had learned. The Kushtaka legend is not about monsters. It is a warning at the boundary of the tame and the wild, where maps thin, identities thin, and orders fray into weather. The patrol brought rules and measures. The ravine answered with mirrors. The three-note whistle proved that names can be played back to their owners. A boy's cap, a dry coat, webbed prints that closed behind them. The Tlingit refused that bay because some borders are guarded by silence, not fences. War usually counts bodies. Here it counted the uncertainty of return. Redfield spoke like a ledger. Ortega wore silence as issued gear. The army wrote, "Impracticable." The land bothered with no reply. The lesson stayed under ice, patient as breath in winter. The enemy may not stand in trenches. It waits in cold that edits men. It molds and swallows until a face fits like clothing, not skin. Perhaps the Kushtaka do not kill. They convert certainty into tidewater. The darkest fear is not death. It is living on under a mistaken name. We draw borders in ink. The wilderness keeps them in memory. Between the two, something learns us and hands us back altered. If pride outruns caution, listen for low, high, low in the wind. If your home speaks from the trees, do not answer its call. Close ranks, count your breaths, and leave the page blank. What do you believe they saw in Thomas Bay that winter?